A big success. President Donald Trump hails new developments in the fighting between Turkey and Kurdish forces. We have the latest. Impeachment investigation. Lawmakers react to new testimony in the probe into President Trump's discussion with the leader of Ukraine. Synod on the Amazon. Analysis of what might be in the final document on the Holy See's meetings on the region. And there's room for more. Why the Holy Father compares the Catholic Church to a tent. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Turkey says it will stop its offensive against the Kurds in Syria and make a U.S.-brokered ceasefire permanent. President Donald Trump calls it a major breakthrough towards achieving a better future for Syria and the Middle East. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. In exchange for the ceasefire, the president plans to lift economic sanctions on Turkey. The fighting between that country and the Kurds began after President Trump pulled U.S. troops from Syria, but now he says the U.S. deserves credit for achieving peace.
This was an outcome created by us, the United States, and nobody else, no other nation. Very simple. And we're willing to take blame, and we're also willing to take credit. This is something they've been trying to do for many, many decades.
According to Turkey, a 5-day ceasefire will now become permanent, and its attack on the Kurds in Syria will end.
However, you would also define the word permanent in that part of the world as somewhat questionable. We all understand that, but I do believe it will be permanent.
The United Nations says the fighting in northern Syria in the past 2 weeks caused over 176,000 people to flee. Thousands of those families are showing up at aid camps in northern Iraq. It all came after President Trump pulled U.S. troops backing Kurdish fighters off the northern Syria border.
Let someone else fight over this long, blood-stained sand.
Now Russia and Turkey will control the border and have demanded the Kurds move further back or face consequences. Some U.S. troops will stay in Syria to safeguard oil fields, and hundreds more are relocating to Iraq, but for how long is unclear. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has been critical of President Trump's Syria strategy. Today he wrote, "It is imperative we continue to partner with Kurdish forces to prevent ISIS from coming back. I do not trust or believe that Turkey, Russia, or Assad have the capability or the desire to protect America from radical Islamic threats like ISIS."
Other lawmakers also worry ISIS could regain strength after the U.S. pull out from Syria. We've been hearing reports of ISIS inmates escaping Kurdish prisons. Today, President Trump said he's received assurances that those prisoners are under strict lock and key. Wyatt.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. The top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine says President Trump wanted the Ukrainian leader to, quote, pay up before getting American aid. William Taylor testified behind closed doors for almost 10 hours yesterday. It's part of the Democrats' impeachment investigation. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvey reports.
Nearly 10 hours of testimony and one explosive opening statement. The head of the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, William Taylor, writes about a conversation with the ambassador to the EU. Ambassador Sondland told me that President Trump had told him that he wants President Zelensky to state publicly that Ukraine will investigate Burisma and alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. Then later, Ambassador Sondland says everything was dependent on such an announcement, including security assistance. Democrats inside these closed doors say it was disturbing.
It was terribly troubling. I think the testimony was very powerful. A lot of the pieces of the puzzle are being put together, and I think facts coming out. The New York Times just reported that the Ukrainian government was aware of the hold on aid before it was previously reported. So, the facts are coming out, and it's upsetting.
Republicans defend the president.
I've been in there for 10 hours. I can assure you there was no quid pro quo.
And the White House press secretary calls it a coordinated smear campaign from far-left lawmakers and radical unelected bureaucrats waging war on the Constitution. Republicans also challenged the Democrats' procedures. All of these depositions do take place behind these closed doors.
By golly, if they're going to do it in public. Don't hide it from the American people. Show your face where we can all see the travesty that you are trying to foist on America and the degradation of our republic that you are engaged in.
Today, a group of about 24 Republicans stormed the secured room.
We're going to go and see if we can get inside. So let's see if we can get in.
Congressman, do we have any questions?
And that delayed the testimony of a Defense Department official who oversees Ukraine. Big questions for her about the withholding of aid to that country. That's the gist of this impeachment inquiry. Did President Trump withhold that aid to force Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden's son? Here at the Capitol, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
And former Vice President Biden is on the campaign trail. Today, he cast President Trump as a billionaire whose tax policies have hurt American workers.
This is the United States of America. There's never, think about this. I'm more optimistic than I've ever been in my career if we move this administration out of the way.
Biden visiting in his hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania. During his 45-minute speech, he said everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. First Lady Melania Trump makes a rare appearance on Capitol Hill. She marked the one-year anniversary of a federal law to help people addicted to opioids.
Because of the SUPPORT Act, we are able to look at ways to reduce opioid use during pregnancy and recognize early childhood issues related to substance abuse.
It was her first solo trip to Capitol Hill. She thanked Congress for its bipartisan support for the proposal. Among those in attendance was presidential advisor Kellyanne Conway. Catholic bishops in Florida are asking the state's governor to halt a planned execution. James Daly is scheduled to face the death penalty next month. He was convicted of murdering a 14-year-old girl in 1985, but church leaders believe there is evidence Daly did not commit the crime. Police have launched an investigation after 39 people are found dead inside a vehicle in southeastern England. The British Prime Minister calls it an unimaginable tragedy.
I know that the thoughts and prayers of all members are with those who lost their lives and their loved ones. I'm receiving regular updates, and the Home Office will work closely with Essex Police as we establish exactly what has happened.
Authorities say the bodies were found in a large cargo truck. The vehicle was registered in Bulgaria and entered the country through Ireland. Police believe the deaths are linked to human trafficking. The Prime Minister also appears set to accept there will be a delay in Britain's exit from the European Union. The EU must now decide whether to agree to postpone Brexit for a third time. It is possible Britain could leave without a deal, but it would severely hit economies on both sides. Officials in Hong Kong have formally withdrawn an unpopular extradition bill. The country's Secretary for Security made the announcement earlier today. He says the bill was removed because it led to conflicts. It's unclear what will happen next. The proposal was followed by 5 months of pro-democracy protests, and there are no signs the demonstrations will end. Catholic leaders in Haiti are leading protests against the government there. Before taking to the streets yesterday, thousands of faithful attended a special mass. An archbishop called for government officials to listen to the path of wisdom. Protesters were unhappy over corruption, inflation, and scarcity of basic goods. The demonstrations began several weeks ago. Participants in the Synod on the Amazon taking place at the Vatican agree their meeting is emphasizing both the importance of embracing indigenous culture and protecting the environment.
The problems are universal. The impact of the Synod will be universal, will affect all of us.
Cardinal Oswald Gracious from Bombay, India, talked about how women can concretely be involved in making pastoral decisions, how the Catholic faith can be lived while keeping Amazonian traditions, and how this meeting of bishops is a clear example of what a synod process should look like. The final document will be released in just a few days. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register, joins us with more. Edward, there have been a lot of ideas that have been proposed in the last 2 weeks, but what concrete steps are being discussed about this synod?
Well, we heard yesterday at yesterday's briefing from the head of the Latin American bishops that they're hoping to create what he's called a new ecclesial body to help bring unity to the Amazon nations. This was one of the probably the most concrete examples we had. We also heard about the efforts to try and get governments to help the Amazonian people more, and also to have new models of energy as well. But the most concrete example was this new ecclesial body.
And this synod hasn't been limited to just the indigenous culture, but also environmental issues, which of course has had a top focus. What can you tell us more about that issue in particular?
Yes, well, there's been a high level of consensus on the environmental issues, climate change and so forth, so much so apparently that the final document only has small sections dedicated to it because there has been so much agreement. But going back to what I said just a moment ago about the new ecclesial body to unify Amazonian nations, there is speculation that that is also connected with this what's called a AAA project, which is aimed to create a sort of natural nature reserve across the Amazon, consisting of all the countries there, and make it into a kind of supranational body. Now, whether it's connected to that, we don't know, but it does seem to be similar. And that project was interestingly founded by Martin von Hildebrand, who is actually the grandson of Dietrich von Hildebrand, the famous German theologian and philosopher.
Very interesting. All right, we'll keep our eye there on the work on the final document, but changing gears, there has been a development that we're following in the Vatican finances. There's been a clearing of the name of the senior figure. Tell us about that. Who is he and why is this significant?
Yes, well, Tommaso Di Ruzza is or has been the director of the Financial Information Authority. He was named as one of 5 officials in the Vatican who were suspended after a raid a few weeks ago. But the Vatican has said today, because his name was released and he was rather dragged through the press, unfairly many thought, that they've actually come out with a statement saying that he did not act improperly, and they have full faith and trust in him. So essentially they put out the statement to clear his name.
Well, a lot of important news that are kind of trickling out of Rome with regards to this investigation into the Vatican finances. So we appreciate your staying on top of that, as well as the Synod. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Coming up, a lawmaker weighs in on the impeachment investigation, and the founder of Facebook testifies on Capitol Hill. Partisan divisions intensify on Capitol Hill as Democrats continue their impeachment inquiry against President Donald Trump. Republicans took action today, as you saw earlier, disrupting a closed-door deposition, bringing the session to a halt. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is Congressman Jody Hice, Republican from Georgia. He's also a member of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. Congressman, welcome into the broadcast. Why was it so important for you to support your fellow Republicans, those who did disrupt the meeting today?
You know, this is an absolutely unprecedented process that we're watching in a so-called impeachment inquiry that, number one, has never even been voted on. You cannot have an impeachment inquiry without there first being a vote on the House floor to do so, which the Democrats have not even done. And so we are having kind of just an absolute false impeachment inquiry to begin with. But you add on top of the fact that this inquiry is behind the shroud of secrecy. There is no transparency whatsoever. Members of Congress are not allowed to be in there unless you're a part of 1 or 2 select committees. Even members of Congress are not able to go read transcripts about this. And this is all unclassified information to begin with, and yet members of Congress are being left out. In addition to that, the entire American citizenry is being left out. And this is an impeachment inquiry on the President of the United States, and no one is being allowed to witness what's going on. And so several of my fellow colleagues today basically said enough is enough. We have a right to know what's going on. This is regarding doing away with the election results of 2016, and the American people elected the president, and we have a right to know what's going on in this impeachment inquiry that is one-sided and is absolutely wrong in every way.
I mentioned that you're a member of the Oversight and Reform Committee, one of those committees involved in the probe. What has been your access to the transcripts been like? Have you been able to see some of this information?
You know, being a part of the committee, I have been able to see the transcripts. But even just yesterday, we've been informed that even those of us who are on the committees of jurisdiction are now going to face even tighter restrictions ourselves. For example, we, even when we want to go look at the transcripts, have to make an appointment to do so. When we have permission and jump through the hoops in order to see the transcripts, we will be required to have a Democratic staff member looking over our shoulder while we are looking over the transcripts ourselves. Again, this is unprecedented. What are they afraid of? What are they trying to hide? What is it that they are trying to keep from the American people? And what it is that they are hiding is the fact that there is nothing impeachable in this whole ordeal. They are simply trying, behind the cloud of secrecy, to keep the truth away from the American people and to keep the truth away from members of Congress so that they can then leak certain things that they want to leak and try to create a public court, if you will, against the president that will harm him in the upcoming election.
Well, how do you respond to those Democrats who argue that any of this secrecy is to protect the integrity of the investigation?
Well, it's absolutely false, because the integrity of the investigation in itself has lost all credibility. It's being led by an individual, Adam Schiff, who repeatedly has lied to the American people, beginning back in the Russian collusion, where he said he had irrefutable evidence that the president colluded with Russia. He did not. He comes out publicly lying about a conversation that the president had with the president of the Ukraine, making up words, making up an entire conversation, and then presenting that to the American public as though it was true. It was not true. He lied about the whistleblower, saying that neither he nor his staff had any communication with the whistleblower, when in fact they did. And now he is leading this so-called impeachment inquiry, where he is not even allowing any witness to come before this committee except those that he believes is going to be detrimental and harmful to the president. We are not allowed to bring our own witnesses to the table, have not been allowed to so far. It's just on and on and on. There is zero credibility in this impeachment inquiry, and for them to claim that somehow the secrecy is to protect the integrity of the hearings, the depositions, is just, it's laughable, it's so disgusting, and it's absolutely false.
Just taking a step back here to reference yesterday's testimony from William Taylor, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine. He's being described as supporting the assertion that a quid pro quo did exist. Based on everything that you've seen and heard, Congressman, what do you think President Trump's actions and his words in his conversation with the president of Ukraine actually indicate?
Well, it's not that difficult to come to the conclusion. We have the transcript. And again, the witnesses that the Democrats continue to bring before these various depositions and transcribed interview hearings and so forth are people who were not part of the conversation. It's second-hand information, third-hand information. And Ambassador Taylor yesterday even referenced fourth-hand information that was being brought to the table. If we want to know what the conversation consisted of between our president and the president of the Ukraine, we need look no further than the transcript of the conversation itself, where there was clearly no quid pro quo. The president simply asked for the Ukrainians to cooperate in an ongoing investigation by our Department of Justice that involved individuals in the Ukraine. And our president has every responsibility and duty to ask for cooperation when a Department of Justice investigation is underway.
All right, we're continuing to follow this situation in this impeachment inquiry on Capitol Hill and all of the fallout as a result. Congressman Jody Hice, Republican from Georgia, thank you so much for talking with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg testified today before the House Financial Services Committee. Democratic Chairwoman Maxine Waters questioned him on Facebook's political ads policy.
On your question about political ads, look, from a business perspective, the very small percent of our business that is made up of political ads does not come anywhere close to justifying the controversy that this incurs for our company. So this really is not about money.
The ranking Republican member, Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, characterized today's hearing as an attack on innovation. Maxine Waters also criticized Facebook's cryptocurrency project Libra. She argued Facebook should be broken up. Up next, Pope Francis weighs in on the violence in Chile and analysis of a new study saying Christianity in the United States is on the decline.
Devono fuggire, ma fuggono con la parola e spargono la parola un po' dappertutto.
Pope Francis says the Catholic Church must always be open and welcoming. At his weekly talk to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father compares the Church to a tent because it's capable of widening its space to include everyone. Pope Francis also prayed for the victims of violence in Chile. He says he's hoping the protesters and the government will find a peaceful solution. A new study indicates Christianity in America is declining at a rapid pace. According to data collected by the Pew Research Center in 2018 and 2019, 65% of American adults describe themselves as Christians. That's down 12 percentage points over the last decade. Meanwhile, the percentage of Americans who don't identify with any religion now stands at 26%, up from 17% in 2009. Joining me now with his analysis is Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University. Robert, good to have you with us here in the studio.
Always good to be back, Wyatt. Thank you.
What's your reaction, what's your gut reaction when you heard about just some of these numbers?
They were disturbing, but not, alas, surprising. This has been a trend over the past decade or more, and affiliation with religious institutions is loosening. One thing to notice, Wyatt, is that it's not so much that people are who were strong believers are ceasing to be believers. It's that people who were weak believers and weakly affiliated, but nevertheless would identify themselves as Catholic or Lutheran or Jewish or what have you, now no longer identify themselves with that. They consider themselves to be nuns, N-O-N-E-S, people who are not affiliated with any religious tradition. There may be Christianity of some sort or Judaism of some sort in the background in their history, but they no longer consider themselves even to be culturally members of this faith or that faith.
Let's talk about Catholics specifically. Catholics in the U.S., 1 in 5 adults, or 20%, are Catholic. That's down from 23% in 2009. What factors do you think specifically for Catholics have been on the decline, or is it like the rest of the churches?
Well, it's part of a larger trend. Catholicism is participating in a larger trend here with other religions. But I don't think there can be any doubt that the sex scandals, going all the way back to the exposure of these scandals in the early part of this century, have had a very damaging effect on the morale of Catholics, and especially in the case of weakly affiliated Catholics, has tended to make them no longer affiliate or identify themselves as Catholic at all.
It has dissuaded a lot of people. The group describing itself as you described, the nuns, the N-O-N-E-S, continues to grow, as you mentioned. 4 in 10 millennials describe themselves as nun. What do you think that says about our society?
Well, it I think bespeaks a collapse of trust when it comes to millennials especially in institutions, including religious institutions. Trust in institutions has been faltering for quite some time in our society, whether it is government, the media, business corporations, even institutions in which there used to be high trust, like courts and the military. Trust is diminishing when it comes to our institutions, and trust in churches and in the Catholic Church among Catholics has diminished, especially among young Catholics. Interestingly, though, young Catholic millennials don't tend to become materialists who don't believe in anything at all. Like many in their generation, while they no longer, in many cases, in a large number of cases, affiliate with traditional religions or understand themselves as members of religions, they regard themselves as spiritual but not religious. Or, in many cases, they identify with New Age sorts of movements, with knockoffs of Eastern, the kind of Western versions of Eastern religions, sometimes even with occult practices. They believe in ghosts and they believe in witches and things like that. So it's not a collapse into materialism. They're looking for the spiritual life. They're just looking at it or for it in the wrong places.
I know Bishop Robert Barron of Los Angeles has talked about that's at least leaving a door open for possible evangelization. They're still
that's right.
kind of open to the possibility.
But there's a message, Wyatt, and that means the church has got to get its own house in order. We have to rebuild trust among the Catholic people. And that's a job for all of us, not just the Pope, it's not just the bishops, it's not just the clergy. It's a job for all Catholics to restore trust in the church. We are, after all, the church. The body of Christ is all the faithful. That's us. And we've all got a role to play in restoring trust to make the church attractive, as it intrinsically is, attractive to all people.
Because there's been attempts to try to, I don't want to say lure people back to church, but to try to get people going back. But it sounds like what you're implying here is that there's much more than that, than just getting people to go to attend Mass, for example.
People need to set good examples in their personal lives, in their moral lives, in going to church and being involved in religious activities. We need to model the faith for each other and for other people. All of us across the spectrum in the church need to exemplify faith in Christ. We need to live it. We need to show its beauty, show its splendor. If, as we believe, Christ is the truth, he himself said, I'm the way, the truth, and life. If he's the truth, then we've got to trust the truth. The truth has a certain splendor, a certain attractiveness. Just let it out. Display the truth, and it will bring people in because of its splendor, because of its luster, because of its attractiveness.
Well, amen to that. And I'm sure so many people would agree with you, and I'm sure people, our viewers especially, will be praying for that. It's always fascinating to have you on and talk about these issues. Professor Robert George McCormick, Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And Professor George will be honored tonight in Washington with the Catholic Information Center's John Paul II Award for the New Evangelization. The award honors those who demonstrate a strong commitment to proclaiming Christ to the world. And with that, we conclude our broadcast for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.